Yeah.
Friends, first of all, welcome to all of you from ISID to this ISID seminar on knowledge sources for innovation by multinational enterprises in analysis of pharma patents. And I think the theme normally would go like in another, paper, academic paper. But these days, there is a lot of interest in the innovative activity of pharmaceutical enterprises, pharmaceutical companies, global companies, in the context of the debate generated by COVID pandemic and the production and development of vaccines and other treatments. So there is a lot of discussion around, the world on the innovation systems of pharmaceutical MNCs. So to say, and whether they are very well organized or there is a room for improvement. And in that context, this analysis which Suma has done along with her colleagues at her university and other collaborators, assumes a lot of interest. What she has done is, I think, very remarkable, that going back in time 40 years, time series on patent citation data to understand how the sources of knowledge for innovation by multinational companies in pharmaceutical industry have evolved. And so some interesting lessons can be derived from that. It gives us an idea of how these multinational companies draw upon different sources of knowledge for their R&D activity, which basically comes to us, or we are consumers of that R&D in the form of medicines and vaccines that we take. So I think it's a very interesting piece of work, of course, very rigorously done. And so we will hear from Suma to make her presentation. And then we have three experts to kind of take her to task, so to say, to look into what she has done and comment upon. And then I will throw it open to all of you. So this is an academic seminar, and we should have an academic discussion, which is no holds bar kind of discussion, and I'm sure everyone will benefit from it, and we will be kind of understanding the issue better. And just to introduce Suma is a professor of technology strategy at the Essex School of Business. I have known Suma for many years. In fact, just before this discussion started, I was asking her whether she was around the same time as Vinish with us in UNU InTech. When I used to be in the 1990s, when I used to be a faculty at UNU InTech, Suma and Vinish, another speaker of today, visited us as PhD interns. So Suma at that time had come from Science Policy Research Unit, if I remember correctly, Suma?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she was a PhD student. But over time, I have seen her grow, in eminence as a professor in different universities and visiting assignments and wide range of publications over time. So I have seen her grow from being a PhD student in 1990s to assume a very important, significant space in the academics in England. And of course, she has also visited the UNU InTech, what became UNU Merit of late. Again, I think as a visiting professor or something.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to have you deliver this seminar, Suma, and join us for this afternoon. And then I will introduce the panelists when we come to that. But let us hear Suma's presentation now.
Thank you
And
very much.
yes,
Thank you,
if
Nagesh.
you want to share any
Yeah, I
PowerPoint,
will.
feel
I
free
will.
to
I
do
will.
that. Yeah,
So
thank you.
let me also reciprocate the thanks. It may not be known to many of you, but Nagesh was quite inspiration for many of us young scholars working on technology and development, because as early as 1985, where we were not in this game of being in academics for publications, Nagesh had actually published works from his thesis in both Research Policy and the Journal of Industrial Economics. And just to know that it was possible by a scholar from India gave other Southern scholars like me a lot of hope. So it's not something that's often mentioned because, for many years now, Nagesh has been involved in the management of research. But he was himself a world-class researcher and opened new avenues, on work on technology and development, and uncovered new sources of data for India. So it's a great honor for me and privilege to be able to speak here today at his institute, and also to have this glowing introduction from him. So thank you very much, Nagesh. I'm also very happy to be at ISID, which I know from a slightly different context as a young lecturer struggling to find and write a PhD proposal. So in those days, ISID was located near Indraprasth Estate. It had offices in the IPO. And it was very close to the university. And I remember that many of us, because we had studied at JNU, were friends with the son of Professor Goel. And so we used to go there to look at the data sets, develop our proposals. So I'm really happy to be able to be associated with this institute again. It gave us a lot of ideas at a time when we were really struggling with information and finding proposals to write which could be funded by scholarship bodies. So I'm really, really pleased about that too. So having said my thanks, I should now turn to thanking and telling you something about this work and the team that I've done it with. So this presentation today is going to be about knowledge sources for innovation by MNEs and an analysis of pharma patents. And I have done this work together with John Cantwell at Rutgers University. John Cantwell, as some of you who work in the area of international business might know, pioneered the study of patent data to understand the technology strategies of multinationals. So this is his data, and it is also drawing on his knowledge of the field in order to do some explorations. So the team consisted of John working with his student Sarah Edris, who's now in Maastricht University, and she looked at this large data set which both Sarah and my colleague Mariana, who's thankfully in the audience today. Hi, Mariana, if you want to wave hello. She was at Essex, has now moved to Sussex. So both Sarah and Mariana basically worked to take John's patent data and organize it at the level of backward citations. So that's the unit of analysis in this paper, the cited citing patent combination. So every patent has, let's say, 10 or 15 citations. So each of those pairs of patent and citation is the unit of analysis that we use in this paper. And this is, of course, a long-standing method used by John in order to look at the knowledge source of the multinational, because you can look at backward citations in a way as prior knowledge which contributes to current knowledge. I think the way that we partitioned the work was Sarah was going to look at the higher education industry links of citations for her dissertation. Mariana was looking at networks and how they have changed over time. So you could look at this citation coming from different sources as a network. And I just sort of went off on a limb and did this time series exploration. I have to say that it has been the least successful of all the papers that I've done so far, but it's one of my favorites because I think I explored something really different here. And I leave that as a caveat also for the discussants, because if by presenting it here and getting these comments, we can improve the paper, then that would be for me well worth everything. So what else do I have to say on this? Yes, so this is the team. Mariana is here. She was very involved in the data, data reorganization and aggregation. So any specific questions about data, I think she can field it. I come to this from a perspective of openness in innovation, which is an area I worked on for a while. And we know that the reasons for open innovation are diverse. So open innovation is when we collaborate with external partners in order to generate innovation. And there's prior work where I've shown with Ashish Arora and San Huang that there is considerable technological heterogeneity in the firms that embrace open innovation. So you could think about this heterogeneity in different ways. But one way of thinking about it is in terms of technology leaders and laggards. So technology leaders may want to embrace openness in order to seek complementary knowledge, but they already have a lot going on for them. So they're very zealous about keeping this knowledge to themselves. Technology laggards may want to acquire knowledge to build upon in the future in the firm, and that motive is quite different. Okay, so this is, we're talking about any firm. It does not have to be a multinational. Firms that are not multinational also embrace openness, but openness in the MNE becomes subtly more complex because it has two dimensions. So the first dimension is that it has to be open to, it could be open to knowledge in other parts of the MNE. So the so-called sister affiliates of the MNE, other R&D departments of the MNE. And this within openness, that is, when you're open to knowledge from other parts of the organization, is one dimension, which is kind of separate and distinct from the knowledge in other geographies. So the idea that you will look into your local environment for sources of knowledge is something that's not new to multinationals. Other firms do it too. But what is really distinctive about multinationals is this ability to draw within itself for new sources of knowledge. So openness in the multinational is more complex and it has two dimensions. This is sort of really the key point here. And there is, of course, a very large literature in international management, which has looked at this issue of knowledge sourcing and subsidiary innovation, again, using patent data. We use the patent data in a particular way, but there is many ways of using this data to study innovation in the MNE, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this. So underlying this body of work is this idea that R&D subsidiaries of multinationals evolved over time from being little replicas of the parent MNE to becoming differentiated centers of excellence. So what is meant by this statement is that before, all MNE R&D units would do some adaptive work to support a production unit. But over time, some R&D units became very good at doing certain things. So they could then benefit from specialization for the group in that kind of work. In India, we experienced this when several multinationals set up software subsidiaries. Now, most of these subsidiaries were meant to provide software to the rest of the group. Okay, so this is an example of a differentiated center for excellence. That is, it brings in all the work related to that particular technology. So over time, when you look at innovative subsidiaries, because you have to be at least doing R&D in a subsidiary to be innovative. So R&D subsidiaries by definition are the ones who file patents. So over time, what scholars have observed is that the more innovative subsidiaries have what they call a dual embeddedness structure. That is, they are very well recognized and cited within the MNE in its own patents. And they're also cited locally because of their openness to innovation in the local context. So the two dimensions that I talked about earlier are also observed in the literature. And empirical work has actually found these two different factors to be really important. So this is also very interesting to note if you are somebody interested in the history of how these ideas develop, that there's a stream of literature that's coming from within the international business tradition, where there has been a long interest in how do we manage subsidiaries effectively. And there's also another tradition coming from the technology management literature, which is really looking at core competencies, technology specialization of countries, and looking for patterns in the exploitation of those specialized capabilities. And both streams of literature have found important things, but the two things that I want to highlight is that in the IB tradition, the complementarity of knowledge sources, internal and external to the MNE, are seen as important in explaining radical innovation. So this is the famous work of people like Fene and Almeida, Anu Fene and Paul Almeida, who showed that in order to really produce radical innovation, multinationals needed to bring in some knowledge from outside the multinational. That makes sense because the whole point of having R&D centers is that they work to a coherent plan. And so they are good at delivering incremental innovations that are useful to the group. But if you want radical innovation, then you need a new departure. And so here the external knowledge was seen as really important in explaining radical innovation. At the same time, there are studies which have shown that host and home economies should have complementary sources, and those complementarities are actually important in explaining patterns of R&D internationalization. So where MNEs decide to go and locate may depend not only on what they know, but it also may depend on how well they can combine knowledge in their home country, or the specialization, or the unique attributes of technological knowledge in their country with those in host economies. So if you have a very good science base in America, then you have engineers in India, then that's a very good fit because those engineers can be made to work with that science base. So that's an example of complementarity. So organization and geography then emerge as the two dominant dimensions along which we may think about technological knowledge accumulating within a multinational. And this figure, developed by John Cantwell, actually expresses this very nicely. So you have two dimensions, the organization and geography, and based on this, we can get 4 types of knowledge networks or links. And we also get 4 sources, broad sources of knowledge accumulation. So you have intra MNE subunit, so within a subunit, it has its own knowledge sources and it builds upon it. And just for simplicity, I call it Q1 because it's useful to have those variables, those shorthands for the variables. Then you have intra-MNE knowledge sources that come from other subsidiaries. I call that Q2. So this is the international MNE knowledge sourcing and exchange, sometimes referred to as reverse knowledge transfer. There are all kinds of, there are many things that have been studied about this. And one thing that stands out about Q2 is that it's incredibly hard to achieve. So transferring knowledge from one subunit to another is very, very difficult. A, because the subunit has no incentives to subsidize another subunit's profitability. And 2, because knowledge is sticky, so the context is really important. And of course, we all understand this because interdisciplinary work, as we have seen even within a university, is so hard to do. And it's the same kind of logic, why should I do something that benefits another department? I would like to pull in the money for myself and so on. So that's the intra-MNE sources of knowledge. And then you have the inter-organizational, that's outside the firm sources of knowledge, which could be local or international. So knowledge could be sourced from other organizations in the host country. So this includes intra-industry collaborations, inter-industry collaborations in a geography, in an area, um, collaborating with higher education universities, research institutes like CSIR, hospitals, very important in pharmaceuticals. And it could also be knowledge sourced internationally from other organizations. So Indian firms learn something from what's happening in Silicon Valley, even if they don't have a subsidiary there. So here the great mystery is like, how do they actually access this knowledge? This is not really very well understood. So that is kind of the broad way in which we're approaching this data. And then we come back to this question of openness and say, well, how does knowledge accumulate and become more open in the MNE? So it becomes more open because subunits begin to tap into external sources. So the accumulation in Q1, which is the unit's own knowledge and its relation to what's happening in Q2, Q3, and Q4, this is the focus of much of the theorizing in R&D subsidiary management. But the point is the changes in Q1 can also produce changes in the flows of local and inter-unit knowledge. So basically, another way of saying that is if I go back to this figure, that Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 are endogenous. That is, changes in one will affect the other. If suddenly a subunit, becomes is developing technology that's path breaking, is going to get known through its patents. And then there'll be other organizations in the local geography who then want to partner with this subsidiary. Similarly, a lot of patents from one unit could draw the attention of other units. So other units can increase their citations by partnering with this unit, and so on. So you get the point of what I'm trying to say here, that these quadrants are all related to each other, and each quadrant is actually signifying a kind of citation pair. That is, the firm, the subunit with its own past patent, citing its own past patents, or the subunit citing other patents of other firms in the same the host location, or the subunit citing firms which are in the sister network, but not in the same geography, and so on. So the system of accumulation in the subsidiary, because of this endogeneity, the system of knowledge accumulation in the subsidiary and its environment can both become more open. And one of the reasons I embarked on this time series sort of analysis was that perhaps by studying the sequence of changes in Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, we may learn more about this process by which knowledge becomes more open in the MNE. So the empirical setting is the pharmaceutical sector. Pharmaceutical sector is the canonical model of the pharmaceutical sector is the canonical model of R&D undertaken to produce a discovery, which is then shipped out as a product. And over time, these firms built a lot of capability in delivering chemical molecules that had therapeutic properties. There's a publication by one of the team, Sarah Edris, which explains the three phases in the evolution of pharma technological paradigms. And that's really interesting to read because she delineates, the first phase where they depended on local sources, the second phase where they had these kind of systematic searches for drugs within particular categories, and the third phase where they become more open. Another book which goes over the same terrain is Alfonso Gambardella's thesis, which was actually about science and innovation, and this is about the early growth of the pharma sector in the US. So anyway, this dominance of pharma sort of began to be challenged from 1982 when the FDA approved Humulin, an insulin produced using biotechnology methods by Genentech and Eli Lilly. 4 more drugs were approved by 1986, and by 1997, the number of biotech drugs approved by the FDA had risen to 125. 125, and of course now, looking for vaccine cures, biotechnology is really important, and we've seen its importance in the number of different platforms that have been generated for vaccines. So biotechnology has basically become important for delivering drugs, and this period of importance started, I think this is the watershed moment, that when the FDA approved this drug, and then since it's just kept on increasing in importance. So the period since the mid-80s marks the decline in technology opportunities in traditional chemical technologies in many large pharma groups. So they had to start to seek ways in which they could absorb this new type of biology competence and understanding how the biology interacts with the chemistry. So to some extent, their external knowledge sourcing was also a response to stem this kind of erosion of capabilities which had happened due to the emergence of biotech. This was widely seen as the next frontier by scientists. So there had to be something done so that, so they started, I think, to look outwards. But this is my reading of the history rather than, and we'll see that we can see this a bit in the data too. So the data we used are those patent backward citation data. I don't know if the handout has been sent to all of you. Can I check? If not, I asked Nagesh to put a handout of tables, for all of you to be able to see.
Yeah,
so,
it has been circulated, Suma, and
okay,
it is
great.
also on the website of ISID.
Yeah. Okay. So in the handout, you can see how we prepare the data on the 11 pharmaceutical MNEs. So the appendix contains the details about how we break up the citation data to reflect knowledge structures in use. So the best way to understand why we are looking at citations all pooled together at the corporate level is to think of it in analogy to article references. So, if you looked at a PhD student's work prior to liberalization in India, we were mainly influenced by what the great teachers in our local geography had told us, right? So our reading list would reflect basically mostly Indian authors and a few, original great minds like Karl Marx or Adam Smith or Ricardo, and, these kind of well-known, let's say, authors and pioneering authors. But if you compare a student in, if you compare a dissertation in let's say 86 to a dissertation from an Indian university in 2001, this is the whole thing has changed. The whole thing has changed because as we became more open to the world and as digitization proceeded, we were able to access more articles. We could see more what other people had done. And our minds, I would like to think, became more open to other ideas. And this is what we are hoping to find with our way of aggregating the patents and splitting it in this way. That if you are becoming more open, then you must find more external sources in your citations than you did before. And linking the patent citations into those 4 quadrants, which contain more detailed links, 13 different types of links, helps us to think about that in a very synthetic way. So we aggregate citations to the corporate level to find the intra and interorganizational dimension. And we use the location of the first inventor of the cited patent to find the local versus the global dimension. And what the appendix does is to take one patent, look at the 5 cited patents link in that one patent, and then tell you how do we break it up into different quadrants. And I think, you know, I included that because I thought it's difficult to describe it in words, but you know, when you see an example, it's probably easier to understand what we've done. So so here are some sort of graphs, you know. So the 4 lines refer to the 4 quadrants. The line right at the bottom, which is very faint. So in the handout, there's a graph which shows you that backward citations really exploded from the 1990s, and so you know, I'm breaking that up. So the I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this line which is right at the bottom is Q2. Okay, and this line which is right on the top is Q3. The line in the middle, the second from the top, is Q4, and this is Q1. Okay, so what you can see is there is an explosion of citation growths, and so you know the 3 Q1, Q3, and Q4 are clearly trended because they are moving together. Q2 is different; it lies at a sort of low level. And so whenever we look at data like this as a time series person, you think, oh, well, I have to detrend this data because, you know, the correlations we observe may be somehow spurious. And in the estimation that we do, we used a particular way of detrending. But just to show you what's happening, I just use shares as a way to detrend, because as overall citations are also rising, if I just take the share of each quadrant in the total citations, I've also achieved a kind of detrending. So what I do here in this figure is show you the breakup of what's happening to the share of each quadrant in total citations in each of these sub periods. So these are 5-year periods starting from 1976. And what you notice when you look at this table for a minute is that there's not much action in Q2 and Q4. So Q2 is about 5%, drops a bit to 3.6, then goes up again to 5.4. So there is not really that much happening there. And similarly with Q4, which is the international inter-organizational collaboration, it sort of stays around a third of all citations, a little more than a third, you know, 38% roughly, hovering around there. But what is really dramatic is that Q1 gets overturned in its primary position by Q3. So Q1 is the unit's own citations, and Q3 is what is happening to citations to local host environment organizations. So the quadrant 1 share of citations dropped from 41% to about 15%. And quadrant 3 citations increased from about 15% to 41%. So it seems like a mirror, it's a sort of complete shift from one to the other. And of course, that is a sign of openness, right? We see more external sources being. So we use a time series methodology, and basically this methodology has 3 steps. Most of you are economists. I probably don't need to explain this to you. Except that, you know, as a person who's worked a lot in management for many years now, this is not a methodology that's very popular in management. It's not really taught in management schools. And so to some extent, you know, there may be things here, I don't know how it works now in economics departments, where the time series has been totally overtaken by panel time series. But anyway, I think you will probably understand this better than other audiences that I have presented to. So I estimate a vector autoregression with 1 lag, and this lag is chosen after several tests. Basically, what this is saying, a vector autoregression is saying all the variables or all 4 quadrants are endogenous, that is, each influences the other. And we can completely characterize the growth of one quadrant in terms of its past values and the past values of the other quadrants. So there are two aspects to this, that all the information in any one quadrant is contained in its own past values. So in a way, it's agnostic about explanatory factors and so on. And this is what makes the VAR very efficient as well. Usually they have very good goodness of fit. So you're treating the current as completely a reflection of the past. And in this kind of a VAR, where I say there are 4 endogenous variables, then you say all the past values of those variables matter. Normally, it is customary to follow up the VAR with a test for Granger causality, where the past values of the RHS variables predict the present values of the LHS. So this is a kind of statistical causality, which is inferred from the VAR, but which I think in a sort of more commonsensical understanding represents a sequence of behavior. And I'm definitely interpreting this in this presentation as a sequence. Okay. So what does the VAR Granger causality tell us? It sheds some light on the sequence of knowledge accumulation activities. And there are many patterns I could write out depending on whether I start with Q1 or Q2 or Q3 or Q4. Because I'm interested in openness to external knowledge by the desire. So if the openness to external knowledge of a subunit is driven by the desire to access complementary knowledge, we would expect to see increases in citations to own knowledge increasing with increasing Q2 and Q3, right? So the VAR would show us all of those as entering with positive coefficients, and Granger causality will say, yes, Q2, Q3 are important to predict Q1. What we find instead in our work is that declining Q1 pushes substitution of knowledge from other sources, notably Q2 and Q3. So we find that decreasing citations to own unit, okay, decreasing citations to own unit actually push up the citations of sister units and local organizations. And I've tried to summarize this here. So you have the tables with you. I won't go into it because it's so difficult to present tables, and you know. So I tried to create this graph where the red lines indicate negative effects and the green lines indicate positive effects. Rather, my colleague Sarah prepared this as a way to summarize the information in the VAR and Granger causality. So the color of the lines is coming from the VAR equation, but the direction of the lines is coming from Granger causality. So only if we think the past values predict. So what I want to point out is the 3 patterns of dynamic substitution we can see. So the dynamic substitution is when there's a red line and a green line together. So first pattern of dynamic substitution is between a local subunit knowledge and international intra-unit knowledge. So this is Q2 substituting Q1. So that's the vertical thing here. The other pattern of substitution we find is local knowledge being substituted. As local knowledge declines, you find an increased use of local interorganizational knowledge. Okay. A somewhat interesting finding was a third area of substitution, where in order to access knowledge, not in the immediate neighborhood of the subsidiary, but in a distant neighborhood, you find this that, you know, they start with international, you know, there's some sister unit who acts as a broker and brings this knowledge into their. So you first find that there is this international intra-MNE kind of link, and then this intra-MNE links with the global unit, which is in its vicinity, and as it links with that global unit, then, you know, it also transmits that knowledge into the MNE network, into the original focal unit. We also find 2 self-reinforcing patterns, but there's really not much theory about it. You know, it's It's just a statistical pattern. So I won't go into that in much detail. So one of the reasons, as Nagesh alluded to, so this is a little bit what we have done. And, I welcome comments on it. But Nagesh also was keen to understand how we can use this kind of methodology in the context of Indian pharma. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the history of Indian pharma, which I know a little bit, maybe not in the most recent years, but at least until 2005, 2006, I was following it pretty closely. So Indian pharma started with the help from domestic CSIR institutions and their own internal R&D and built significant process capability over time. And this is a well-told story, how the Indian Patent Act of 1976 helped that process. I think what is less well told is how domestic CSIR institutions supported it, how they built these networks with local science universities. I think that we don't really, I don't know, I haven't seen that much written about it recently. And the patenting records for Indian firms begin since at least the 1990s, when Ranbaxy took out the first patent in the USPTO. But I think there were earlier patents in the Indian patent data. These firms also, when they broke into the generics market and realized that this market is going to close down very fast, they also faced the biotech challenge. Okay, so they have tried very hard to build biotech capabilities within their organizations. I don't know that they have been very successful. All the leading firms, Ranbaxy, DRL, Wockhardt, Cipla, established R&D labs abroad, and they tapped into diaspora talent for the management of those R&D projects. The last data I could find for the patent holdings for these firms is 2015 in the USPTO, with about 50 to 60 patents each. I didn't do a detailed search. It's just I looked for documents which the USPTO often puts out the statement about the leading firms from each country. So the last one was in 2015, 50 to 60 patents for each of these firms in the USPTO. And I think it would be really interesting because their journey is a different one from the journey of other established MNE, or perhaps it's not different. I don't know. But we could use this methodology to look at those data, the data in USPTO and the Indian patent data, which for some reason that I've never understood is very opaque. I've never seen any study that is published in any good journal which uses Indian patent data. And I would really like you guys to tell me about it, because most of the market for these companies is still domestic. And so, it makes sense that they would protect their new products in patents in India, but I don't see any analysis of this kind. So we could use the same comparison, because we don't know how much those overseas labs established by the leading firms managed to transfer technology. So the significance of looking at this kind of method and data for Indian firms in USPTO and in the Indian Patent Office data is that, there has been some attention given to the asset-seeking investments of Indian firms in Western countries, also by Chinese firms, and these have drawn a lot of attention. But we know from work on Western multinationals that integrating knowledge from foreign subsidiaries is an exceedingly difficult task. We also know that many Indian firms historically and currently also probably draw on local knowledge bases of universities and CSIR. And by comparing which types of external knowledge bases have more influence in creating new inventions, this may be of interest for not only firm strategy, but also for public policy towards innovation. If it turns out that most of the citation is to what's happening in universities, then the public policy sort of conclusion from this is, well, help that more. Create more incentives for this interaction between universities and firms. Subsidize it in different ways. Maybe this is already happening, but you could, it would be a clear signal. But if External knowledge bases, if Indian firms have bucked the trend, that is, they have found management practices that allow them, or they have incentivized their overseas subsidiaries to transfer this knowledge from their to other sister subsidiaries, then great. I mean, that's something we should also learn from for the strategy literature. And so I think, from both these perspectives, a study like this would be quite interesting to undertake. I'll stop here. I think I went a bit over the time limit. I expected to talk for um, I expected to talk only for half an hour, but I've gone a lot over. I've gone 45 minutes. Sorry about that.
Not at all, Suma. I think it was a very interesting presentation, and this helps to explain the globalization of R&D by multinational companies. They, setting up R&D units in different places to absorb knowledge spillovers from public institutions, universities, and other, activities happening around the world. So certainly very thoughtful analysis, and because you have used such a long time series, one can see the big picture trends emerging over time. So let me now turn to our three panelists, to comment upon this paper, and I hope they can, limit their remarks to 5 minutes each, because I want to really throw it open to the questions and answers from the floor at the end. And of course, we will extend the time beyond 4 o'clock a little bit to accommodate that. So let me turn to Professor Vinish Katuria, the first, panelist. And Vinish is a professor at the IIT Mumbai's or IIT Bombay's School of Management. So, and again, like Suma, I got to know him in 1990s in my time at UNU Intech in Maastricht in the Netherlands, where he joined us briefly as a PhD intern. And again, like Suma, I have seen him grow over time, publishing very widely on technology, innovation, productivity related issues. So over to you, Vinish.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to share my screen. Is it possible? And yeah, I think before that, I would like to say that when we all embarked on our journey of PhD, I think we already had a frontier, and Dr. Nagesh was the frontier which kept on moving. And we had a lot of inspiration from his work. And then I also would like to thank ISID, because without ISID, I think I would not have done my PhD. I took data from ISID, and which helped me to work on FDI spillovers. So without ISID and Dr. Nagesh, I think I would not have reached where I am now. Okay, now a very interesting paper. So I'll spend 5 to 7 minutes maximum. So it is a joint work as mentioned by Suma. So I'll just summarize in 2-3 slides what the paper is for the general audience. So basic premise of the paper is that MNEs generation of innovation is a function of their ability to assimilate knowledge. Now they can source it externally from other organizations, other countries, or they can source it locally or embed it locally. So their own, their other counterparts or within the same multinational corporation, other subsidiaries, and which is called as double embeddedness in the paper. Now there is a existing evidence, both theoretical and empirical, which suggests that all sources are they are complementary. There is a complementarity for subsidiary innovation. Now, does this complementarity hold over time for the sector as a whole? So this was a question posed in the paper also. So, and this has been tested in the present paper. So I have some comment on this, but I'll come to that a little later. Then there is another premise is that, so it is, the paper is saying that it is conceivable that MNE subunits end up replacing one source of knowledge with another. Now, why should MNE replace one source with another? Because when building these networks, be it at the local level or at the intra-organization level, is time consuming and have lots of part dependency. So it means if they are building other networks and at the cost of the existing one, then one has to give a better explanation why it is happening. Now, there are two types of networks are used in the innovation. One is agency-based and second one is knowledge network. And the present paper talks about that, or they have used knowledge network, not the agency based. Again, I have some question on that. Now, there are 4 different sources of innovation. One is local intra-MNE, which paper says Q1. Then there is an international intra-MNE, which is called Q2. And then there is a local inter-organizational, which is Q3. And the 4th one is international or inter-organizational, which is Q4. Now, one can clearly see that first 2 are embedded in the local and the other 2 are global embedded, if you see that. Having stated that, now one can clearly see, the aim of this paper is to see the relevance of each source over a period of time. In order to do that, they have used US Patent Office data for 41 years. So which is, according to me, is a huge task, getting all this data and then putting into these 4 different questions or 4 different sources. Now, which covers 18 areas of pharmaceutical sector, but there was one which I did not get it. Getting an immune system. Is there really a sector which is called getting immune system? Then they have looked into all the backward citation or all the earlier citation of these patents. And again, they use the ownership structure using Dun and Bradstreet directories, if D&B is correct. And there were 11 corporate groups engaged in pharma research, and post merger and acquisition, they found that they belong to 9. And then they also found that there is a biotechnology shock, and they accounted for the shock through a dummy, which was for 1986-2016. The dummy gets a value 1 and else 0. Though the dummy was not very significant, they have mentioned the paper. Now, the relevance of different sources has been tested in VAR framework and through Granger causality. And data shows that over this 41-year period, there is a declining reliance on Q1, which is internal or local knowledge, and increased reliance on Q3, which is a local inter-organizational. So that is interesting because it means there are other networks are available now with which the subunits can tap. Basically, it's a reflection of that. Now, I'll just summarize their results, what they have said, and then I'll come to my comments. So pharmaceutical MNEs showed dynamic substitutability of unit knowledge sources. MNEs moved away from relying on their own internally generated knowledge of Q1, and they went to increase use of international inter-unit and local inter-organized knowledge source Q3. And there is an international intra-organizational knowledge Q2 being substituted by Q4. So these are the 3-4 key results which they have it. Now, if you see, and this is again from their paper only. So all these channels they have given that whenever it's a green line, it means it is positive. Whenever it's a red line, it is negative. So I have one question on this also. Okay. Now there are one major point is that, so earlier they say that complementarity through short panels or cross-sectional data is causing spurious correlation, which is true also. And to account for this, one has to use longitudinal data or a longer time series. And 41 years of data has been used. But the one problem with the moment you use longer time series is a structural break, which cannot be ruled out. For 41 year period, there can be structural breaks. How to account for that? And if you look at this, so I can see at least 2 structural breaks during this period. One is something around 93, 94, 95, and then for sure from 2005 onwards. Now there are techniques available. So, or even biotech shock is also a structural break in the way patenting has been done. So data also shows that structural break after 2005, how to account for. Now, there are ways, the structural break, if it is exogenous, means you know a priori that this is a structural break, then it is easy. But many times it will be endogenous, so we will not be knowing. So then there are, I think there are researchers who have worked on this. So there is a Givot and Andrews who has looked into one endogenous structural break. And then there is another paper which has been used quite often, assuming 2 endogenous structural break. So one can try this basically in these techniques. Is there any structural break or not? So that is the first thing. Now, since each of the series could be integrated in a different order, now this is Granger or VAR has been used extensively, but in last 15-20 years, people are using ARDL also, which is called autoregressive distributed lag, which is, according to me, is more advanced, and it does not worry about whether you have, if you have multiple series, they can be integrated of different order. So ARDL is not bothered about their ordering also. So it is more, that's why it is being used. And now there is a dynamic ARDL also, which accounts for these structural breaks also. Now, if you see that all these 4 different sources have different structural break also, it is not that it is occurring at the same time. So it will be more relevant in that context. Now, in your results, where there were red lines, so it was a little confusing. Why different sources should influence other negatively? When there is a bidirectional negative relationship, why it should? Is it a data related problem, or there has to be some explanation? If not at the entire, say 18 combined sector, maybe some sector at least, or some subsectors. And ARDL, another advantage of ARDL is that it gives both short-term and long-term relationship. It is possible that this bidirectional relationship is a negative in the short run, but maybe more positive or having no influence in the long run. So though both can be captured through ARDL. So that is the first major point. Second, I have a few other points that you see, though you have done for pharmaceutical sector, but it has to be in a context. How patents generated in pharma vis-a-vis overall patent generation. So that was missing. So though it is only a pharma sector, but the context that pharma is more important. So it is also possible that in telecommunication, you have more patent generated. There also these things may be relevant. And which segment has generated more patents and which has relied more on backward citation. So this will have implication on different sources of innovation also. So which was missing in the paper as of now. Now, this was a question posed earlier that does this complementarity hold over time for the sector as a whole? Now, I mean, I was thinking what could be the basis for assuming that this complementarity would not hold for other firms in the sector. Now, if you have to compete with other firms, then it should hold for any firm in the sector. But the way it has been posed that it was holding for one unit, will it hold for the entire sector or not? So I thought, I think, or I might have read it differently. And this paper has used knowledge network framework, and some more discussion would have been useful for the reader about comparing both the frameworks, agency framework or knowledge network framework, and are they really mutually exclusive? Because there are agency problem in knowledge network too. So how to account for that basically? And then in literature review, some of these literature, all are very important, but some are a little dated because their relevance may not be there if you look at a longer time series. For example, there is an interesting table which talks about the role of local and global embeddedness and their role for subsidiary performance, and 7 subsidiaries in Brazil or Fiat subsidiaries. Now, how many of these studies were pertaining to pharma? So that would be more relevant. It is, I think, a summary of all the studies, but that would give an idea, relevance of both the double embeddedness for the present study. And a column can be added in the table, giving the sector and also the country, for which country they have done it. So that was also missing, or all have done for USPTO. So that was not clear. Now, a study which was a little interesting, so which found that foreign located subsidiaries, they rely exclusively on home region knowledge sources. Now, this is a very little old study because situation might have changed and most foreign firms have relocated their R&D centers to developing countries like India. So if you see that Google, IBM, Adobe or Walmart or Sigma Aldrich all have their R&D center in India. So whether those kind of findings will still be very, very relevant or not in today's context. And patent citations are widely, again, there is a statement in the paper that patent citations are widely used in the literature on knowledge sourcing by subsidiaries. Now, who is filing the patent? That becomes very important. Is it a parent firm or subsidiary? Suppose it is filed by patent. How do we account for local embeddedness of subsidiary? So which was missing as of now. I thought this will be an interesting thing to look into. And there are a few minor points. So now you talked about biotechnology peak, 87 to 98. If peak is for 12 years, why dummy for all the years? So 1986 to 2016, the dummy has been put. And I think I was also a little, our paper makes strong theoretical contribution. I thought is it important or strong? So one can have an important contribution, but not strong. So that was a minor point. And there was brief discussion about global environment is changing due to climate change. I mean, why to talk about climate change? Because is technological disruption not enough to warrant this study? Because climate change will take you to a different direction. And I don't think these patents are pertaining to climate change at all. And then biotechnology challenge is plugging the capability gap between past knowledge and future requirement. This I also find very interesting. But is it specific to biotech sector or pharma sector? That would be true for any dynamic sector. Something plugging, maybe some challenge may be occurring, which may be inducing them to go for more and more patenting, or relying on more global embeddedness rather than relying on their own subunits, basically. So these are the few comments I wanted to tell. Thank you very much. Yeah, but it's very interesting paper. Yeah.
Thank you, Vinish, for very interesting comments. I'm sure Suma will find them very useful, especially this structural break, point is important and worth looking into. But I'm sure Suma will reflect on them. Now, let me turn to our second panelist, which is Professor Aradhana Agarwal. She is currently a professor at the Copenhagen Business School, which is very prestigious institution globally. But she has worked in India in different institutions, including Institute of Economic Growth, including at NCAER, including at the South Delhi campus. And she has also taught for many years in college, one of the colleges of Delhi University. So very, sort of well-published academic and who has worked on these issues for a long time. So I'm sure she will have some insights on Suma's paper as well. Over to you, Aradhana.
Thank you, Nagesh. Thank you for the lavish introduction. And Suma, actually, and also for inviting me, because I know that I have a long association with you. You have been my co-author. You have been my guru, actually, because when I did my PhD, I followed your work more intensely, and I have shared that with you. So thank you for being there and for being inspiration for so many people in the beginning. So without much ado, actually, I would just like to say a few things, because I have been given 5 minutes, and of course, everybody must be very busy. Well, actually, I don't have any written presentation for my discussion, but I have certain points which I would like to make sequentially. My first question is that when I read this paper, I found it very interesting and very absorbing, I would say. But then at the end of the paper, I felt, what is the contribution of this paper? How it has provided new insights? You know, much of this work has already been done. They are shown that, and you yourself in the paper have highlighted how different studies have come up with different findings. So the question is how you are contributing to this knowledge which is already existing. So I think that you must mention right in the beginning, so that evokes more interest, like what is the actual gap. And what my understanding was that it is more dynamic and more holistic. So that's what actually I thought. Otherwise, we don't have like, you made a point that which Vinish also pointed out, which he says minor, but actually in my comments, it is a major point. I believe that I didn't see much of theoretical contribution, and even the hypothesis building, I thought that you actually need a lot of sound arguments to come to your hypothesis building. In fact, when you take biotech firms, biotech sector, it's a sector which cannot survive without innovation. You know, it must be understood. It is entirely based on that. And there are thousands of startups which have come now, and those startups actually are doing a lot of value addition, and many MNEs are actually acquiring those startups. So without going through patents, they actually get a lot of knowledge sourcing from these startup companies. So I think that is also a very interesting point which could be actually introduced. And also this technology is becoming so complex that and so interdisciplinary that this thing is bound to happen. You know, they have to source from other sources. No, you cannot really survive unless you really go out and you really look for the sources, because, you know, if you look at biotechnology, many of these innovations are AI. You know, they are not related with pharma, they are AI, and that is in IT sector. Then there is big data that is being used. So there's genetic data. So I mean, there is so much to learn in this, that it is not about capability erosion. This is what actually I felt that this is not how it would really be built. You know, it is more about how a sector which is so dynamically innovative, where you know, the basis of the entire sector existence is about innovation. It is very important. I mean, it actually leads to this kind of scenario. So this is my first point about this. Secondly, what I found in your theory building, that you use this MNE subsidiary relationship. You know, this Copenhagen School is very actually known for this kind of literature. That is a relationship between MNEs and its subsidiaries, and you have drawn on that through your network theory. But you didn't really build those arguments sufficiently strong to really build a testable hypothesis. You did say that there can be negative relationship, but theoretically you did not really build the arguments around that negative relationship, and then how it can be a testable hypothesis, which, so you mentioned certain testable hypothesis. So I think it is very important to strengthen the context of this paper and the theoretical background of this paper. So this is absolutely important if you really want to make it you know, as you yourself said that you want to. And then, you know, there is this whole question of which actually I just thought maybe for future research, or you can just throw up those questions, like, you know, this normally this literature that you have referred is about you know, MNEs and its independent subsidiaries. Okay, so this is the literature that when you say MNEs subsidiary relationship, now normally this is what you have in mind, and the IB literature generally talks about that. But what about global value chains? So in global value chains, you know, when most of the investment is now taking through global value chains, so how this kind of knowledge can happen? Because I am here in special economic zones where most of the firms are in global value chains. They simply say that they actually get the knowledge, they get everything from the top, and they just, you know, do whatever. So they just do something, you know, some day-to-day problems that they face, they actually get into there, and basically everything comes from there. You are talking about R&D subsidiary. So I mean, this R&D subsidiary is also global value chain, but this is just a part. But actually in your paper, you are not really focusing only on R&D subsidiary. You are focusing on subsidiaries as a whole. Okay, so I think this you need to really make a sort of balance there, and maybe you can throw up that question. Maybe you can talk about limitations. So somewhere, you know, because most of FDI is now coming in the form of through global value chains these days. So so overall, what I would say that, you know, the paper, and yes, final point actually I would like to make is about the methodology. In fact, Vinish is very strong about it, and he has given you some of the comments there. But let me just briefly, I mean, I also have a little comment there. You may think about it. You have used VAR there, but maybe you could use augmented VAR, you know, instead of just VAR. So maybe that could really introduce or capture the effects of certain, whatever Vinish said, that structural change, or, you know, the pattern change or whatever. So that is also one that I have in my comments. So maybe, you know, that is one thing that you can try. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aradhana. Again, very good points. I'm sure Suma will mull over them, especially on strengthening the theoretical foundations of the paper. So with that, let me turn to our third panelist, who is my own colleague, Reggie Joseph, who has also been working for a number of years on the pharmaceutical innovations and you know, other related issues. And he's associate professor at ISID and a well-published scholar. So, so you have the floor, Reggie, to comment upon this paper.
Thank you, Professor Nagesh, for the introduction. Thank you, Professor Suma, for this highly informative presentation. So yeah, that was a very technical paper, and you presented in a very lucid way. So we could capture your presentation very easily. For my discussion, I would focus on two key points from your presentation. So one is that you said that openness to innovation, it has become very important for creating radical innovation in the current situations. And the multinational companies, they create specialized centers of excellence within its network. Could be local, could be foreign. So these are very important elements of creating capabilities for doing radical innovation. And here you emphasize the point that R&D subsidiaries are those who file for patents. So this is one characterization that you have made of R&D subsidiaries. Then the second point is on the declining technology capability due to some shock. Here it is the advent of biotechnology. Then how multinational companies tend to substitute the erosion of their knowledge capability. So they adopt various strategies, and you have did an analysis on from what all sources the substitution is made. So now to make my point, I would like to share my screen. Yeah. So in analysis, what you find is that as the own innovation, due to the erosion of technology capability from the R&D of the headquarters, so you.
Are we looking at the right slide?
You have to reshare.
One second, let me. Can you not see my?
I see growing share of R&D performed by foreign subsidiaries.
Yeah. So your point was that the share of the citations coming from the international
subunits,
intra-MNE network, it has been very stagnant. Okay, but the evidence that is coming out is showing that these MNEs are increasingly spending on R&D in foreign locations. So this data, this chart I have compiled from the data available in the Science and Technology Indicators of National Science Foundation of United States. It is showing that the share of R&D performed by majority-owned affiliates of US multinationals in foreign countries, it is growing steadily. Similarly, if we look at the Greenfield FDI data that is published by, that is compiled by the Financial Times, it shows that the share of Greenfield outward FDI in R&D and design, development and testing as a percentage of total GFDI, it has been increasing over a period of time. This shows that there is an increasing interest among MNEs to invest and do R&D in foreign locations. And a part of it could be subsidiaries, intra-MNE network. But that is not getting captured in the analysis you have done. So what could be the reason for that? So what I feel is that to capture that, we may have to do, we may have to bring in the agency perspective. So I looked at the patent filing of one of the companies. It is not a pharma company, but it's in the IT field. So in India, we had this company, Cosmic Circuits Private Limited. It was taken over by a US-based Cadence Design Systems in 2013. So before 2013, before this takeover, the Cosmic Circuits had patents in its name in US and in India. After this takeover, then this company was renamed as Cadence AMS Design India Private Limited. So we do not see any patent in the name of this company. But if we search using the parent's name, we can see patents. And if you look at the inventor, so we can see they're from India. So then I did a LinkedIn search. So in the patent application, we cannot find the affiliation of the inventor. So when I search for their affiliation in the LinkedIn platform, so I could find that they all of them are from this company's R&D center based in Noida. So here the subsidiary that was Cadence AMS Design India Limited, that was not mentioned anywhere in the patent application. So to capture that, probably we may have to look into, we may have to bring in some agency aspects. Why that is happening? Probably because the R&D is happening here, but it's entirely owned by the parent company. The subsidiary in India is not recognized for that. So this is one comment I have. The other one is on, see, you have shown that there is an increasing share of citations from Q3, that inter-organizational local sources. This could be because this need not represent the substitution of declining knowledge. This could be probably because the emerging technologies demand that kind of collaboration. See, we have these frontier technologies coming up. The studies on frontier technologies suggest that these technologies come up in sources outside of the traditionally classified industrial clusters. So in such cases, to take advantage of the frontier technologies coming up, they may have to collaborate with other agencies like startups in the same location. That need not show a decline of capability of the parent's firm location. This could be because the technology demands that kind of a collaboration. Then I have one this clarificatory question. So you in the paper you circulated, you had mentioned that your analysis was based on the patent assignee. But when you presented, you said you looked at the first inventor. But from the first inventor, how can you make out whether it is intra-MNE or inter-MNE? Because the affiliation is not given. Then how did you do that that assessment? Yeah, these are my brief points. Thank you.
Thank you, Reji, for bringing other set of comments for Suma. I'm sure she would mull over them. Let me, before inviting Suma to respond, let me open it up and see if there are any questions or comments or clarifications from any of our audiences, participants who are on board. And I see some movement. Professor Ananya Ghosh is raising a finger. Yes, go ahead, Ananya.
Yes, it was a great learning experience. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
you are.
yeah.
Yes,
But we
go
can't
ahead.
see you. I don't know. I don't see you.
No, yeah, she is very much on the screen.
Hi.
Yes. Hello, hello. I was on the wrong page. Okay.
Great presentation, learned a lot. I just want to share that one of my students, PhD students, had actually worked on this topic. It's called, her thesis is called Strategic Alliances for Knowledge Creation and Absorption, a study of Indian industries. And her entire focus was on precisely this issue, as you can see, of how companies form strategic alliances, mostly with outsiders, international sort of partners for knowledge creation and absorption. So her thesis has both a secondary database work as well as sort of case studies. So, you could, like all good students, she teaches in a college and has so much work. She does not have time to publish. So she's only published bits of her research. It would be great if you got in touch with her. I can help you do that. Her name is Rupali Khanna Arora. She teaches in the Kamla Nehru College. So I just want to...
Yeah, gladly. Please tell her to write to me. She can email me.
Yeah. All right. Let me see if there any other comments anybody wants to raise. Mr. Ashwini Gupta or anyone of the participants? Yes? None? Okay, then in that case, let me go back to Suma. And Suma, you want to respond to some of the comments?
Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Excellent comments. I think when I opened the presentation, I said that, this was not one of my most successful papers. And partly it's because it started out as an empirical exploration, and then we tried to put a theoretical frame on it, and it didn't work. So I think my thinking now is I should write it the way I thought of it, which is as an exploration in openness, and really not make any theory claims, but just say, what does this exploration, looking at it over time, actually find for us? So, so many of the points that Vinesh made and Anu made regarding this, so I completely take that point is correct. I think that the particular methodological nuances that were suggested by Vinesh are very helpful, and I'm definitely going to try them out. In the way that I had thought about this earlier, I had actually wanted to test it in different sectors to see if pharma was somehow... So at the moment, the problem we have is we have a theory that comes from quite different sectors. And then we're looking at one sectors where, in fact, the firms, I mean, this is also some point you mentioned, Vinesh, that why would any firm, why would this not apply to any firm? And actually, when you disaggregate this data, like if I look at each of those 11 firms separately, then I find quite different patterns. So different firms do different things. Some firms are happier, or they seem to be like more relying on knowledge sources outside, others on inside. Firms like Novartis, which were born out of a merger, have internalized. So some of what comes as, within within MNE innovation sources, actually what all the companies they acquired, as Anu also mentioned, this is very important. So the sector is quite heterogeneous. If you look at the actions of firms, the problem here is that only for some firms is the data thick enough to allow us to infer the patterns correctly. That's why I didn't really present it. So then you can ask, well, why these 5? Those are where we found the patterns based on the demands of, VAR analysis. But I think there is a plan that we will extend this to other sectors also with a longer span of data. So that is one thing I wanted to say. Relevance to other sectors is probably that you might find other patterns in different sectors. I imagine, for example, the environmental sector, which I really want to study. EPO now classifies patents according to whether they're green or not. So some of the things that I've looked at in this space is that these patents are actually held by, most green patents are held, you won't believe this, but by GE and Bosch. Would you have expected that? Like we think of Suntech and Suzlon, but actually the larger number of patents are held by these transport companies. And there, obviously there's a complementarity factor, right? Because of regulations or whatever, you need to combine these two and yeah. So I expect that there the pattern will look very different. Similarly, automobiles where global value chains have been very common for a long time, the pattern may look different. And part of this is exploratory to see whether, you know, these patterns are really different or same. So that's how I started. So I think, you know, I hope that answers some of your questions. The patterns may vary by sector, but also may vary by firm within a sector. And this is the point. Then there was another point which was common to some of the things Anu said and what Reiji said, which was about agency. So again, you know, this is, I know that a lot of the study on openness has come through an agency theory perspective, but we are looking at this issue as the building of knowledge bases. So in a way, the whole exercise of, you know, aggregating these patterns to a corporate level has been to get rid of the agency and to look at the social construction of the knowledge base, you know, within the multinational. So I know that it is got to be explained a bit better, perhaps, but I'm sorry this point didn't come across, but we don't want to look at agency. This is the one thing we don't really want to do. So that was one. And maybe something else I should mention is there is internationalization of R&D, and as our results show, the international subsidiaries are also very instrumental in bringing different knowledge sources to the attention of a particular subunit of the MNE. So one way to say this is to say that the international network of subsidiaries makes the multinational more open, even though it may not draw on its own subsidiaries' knowledge. So Reiji, I hope you can see the connection between the facts you presented and what I'm saying now. So you may have internationalization of R&D, and this internationalization of R&D might bring certain institutions or other firms to the attention of the headquarters and also other units. And this in turn might create an openness in the knowledge structure. But this does not mean that that subunit directly contributes in terms of its own knowledge. So that's the point I was trying to make, that the uptake from subunits, from their patents, is very small. And this is a kind of consistent with the rest of the evidence in the literature, that it's very hard to transfer this technology. But there are other ways in which subunits contribute to the internationalization and openness of knowledge. And this is by bringing other actors in their local environment to the attention of the focal subunit. I enjoyed the comments. It would be great to have your slides, Vinish, if it's okay, just because in case I left out some points, maybe we can do that over email. But I have one question, which I guess, oh, and there's also this thing about the first inventor. It's a very standard convention in patent work. But maybe offline I could talk to you about it, Reiji, because just such a technical point. What I wanted to ask was, do you see any scope, because that's how I was invited to present this, that how can we apply this to the Indian context? So having seen the methodology and having seen what we did with the USPTO data, do you think there is scope for extending this work, as I suggested in my last slides, to study Indian pharma? I just would really like a bit of discussion on that, because I think, Nagesh, that was the purpose as well, right?
Yes. I think Vinish is in a good position to answer this.
No, you see, Suma has also mentioned, and you have also mentioned, in Indian context, not much work has has happened. So in that way, it is good. But the moment you bring this time series techniques, you are on a weak wicket. So unless, because I also had similar kind of paper. I wanted to see relation between, say, your academic publication or your journal publication and patenting and your GDP growth. And I also applied the same technique. But the number of journals, they rejected it. There is nothing new is there in this.
I see.
Yeah. So, but now how, again, unless you motivate it nicely through your theoretical work, then empirical work will only, because a lot of data in categorizing itself is a lot of effort. So that is not an easy effort. You know, so it means theory has to be good. So once theory is there, then I think one can do it. And Indian context now, do they have these kind of linkages? First, one has to see. Are they really dependent on those embeddedness or not? Or as many of Reggie also mentioned, Aradhana has also mentioned, now if many other sectors are coming into the picture, say like AI is coming to the picture, or biotechnology is there, so like, or maybe energy tech, something they are learning from other sector, then it is not specific to pharma sector. So then again, how to defend it in that sense? So it becomes little.
So what are you saying, that this is not good to do in the Indian context because the publication is going to be hard? Okay, but you can work on the theory. But what's the second point? Is that
will you be having enough data on patents also?
I see.
That is itself, because there will not be that many. You see, when you have so many patents, I think thousands of patents in USA every year. There entirely you will find 1,000 or 1,200 patents or 1,500 patents maximum.
Okay.
Yeah, I see a hand being raised by Smita. You know, she has been working with us for many years. Smita, you have the floor. Hello? Yes, hello. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of the panelists. All of them were pointing out about how not to look at it in terms of knowledge erosion, capability erosion, but the fact that inter-organizational and interdisciplinary collaboration is the way of, is the competitive strategy, is the way business is working. And also the fact that there are so many acquisitions happening across, across industries, precisely to build on the existing capabilities. So to look at it in terms of capability erosion, I am interested in is to explore how what you saw in terms of the decline in Q1. Of course, there are questions about that. But if in any case, the increase in Q3 is prominent, right? So which is the increase in MNE parent firms on national patents, if I understand correctly.
Q3? No, it's the citations to local firms.
Yeah, it's the citations to local firms.
Yeah.
Okay, but that
or national. Yeah, we are defining it by nation. Yes, right.
Yeah,
you're right.
The parent firm's nationality, right?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that policy angle in terms of how the the official policy which enables the interactions contribute to this kind of dynamics, which actually helps increase the capabilities within the nation. I know you're talking from the firm's point of view, but I'm just
You're saying what's the public policy implication?
Yeah, you mentioned it. Yeah, I'm just throwing it out. That would be something to conclude as part of your
Okay. Yeah, I see.
Thank you. Suma, go ahead, please. Yes.
I didn't have anything to say. I was just nodding.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that case,
but can I just ask my co-author who's here if she would like to make some further points? Mariana, are you there still?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to make any specific point. There are just very few technicality, like the aspect that we account for acquisition. So we, for example, have monitored mergers and acquisition in our data and this kind of aspect. So most of the, I would say, small technicalities have been addressed, but maybe it's not easy, to account for all of them in one presentation. But all the other points are very much relevant.
Exactly. Well, it's time for me to thank Suma, her co-authors, and the three panelists, and all of you for joining us this afternoon. I think it was a very interesting presentation, which highlighted number of important trends which have been taking place in how research and innovation in multinational companies in pharmaceutical sector is changing over time in terms of using knowledge spillovers from different places, and how what are the implications of that for R&D or innovation activity in Indian companies, for instance. And this is something which we need to explore with you, Suma, more in the coming months and years. So with that, thank you once again for giving us this, presentation, and to all my, colleagues on the panel. Thank you very much for finding time to join us and go through the paper, make very sensible and useful comments, which I'm sure Suma and her colleagues and her co-authors will find very useful. So with that, thank you very much. Let's stay engaged in discussing different aspects of industrial economics and innovation and what else goes with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Nagesh. Bye.
Bye.